Hi everyone, and welcome to D&D Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a creepy dude that lures his daughter's friend into a strange day with him with the promise of playing D&D. A story about a Dungeons & Dragons player being pushed out of the game because she did not want to date the Dungeon Master's friend, and more. So, with the preamble out of the way, let's get into these D&D horror stories. Best friend's father uses D&D as an excuse to creep on me. By Reddit user Turbulent Permit 867. Hello, long-time lurker here. I hope this is the right subreddit for the story, as it's more focused on the events that happened outside of the campaign. This happened about 8 years ago, when I was in my teens, so memory might be a bit hazy. The story is about myself, my best friend, who I'll call Sarah, and this guy, who I'll call Tom. Some important context before the story starts. I was barely older than a minor at this point in my life, and had very recently come out as a lesbian. Tom knew this because he was Sarah's father. He also knew that I was reclusive and vulnerable. I suffered with a lot of anxiety problems, didn't have many friends, and had a hard time saying no to people. With that out of the way, let's get into the main story. This was quite literally a one random day scenario where Tom had invited me to a session with no prior discussion of D&D in all the years that I'd known him. I don't even remember how the topic came up. I just remember him saying that he had a group he played with and asked if I'd like to come along for the next session. He promised that he'd tell Sarah about it and bring her along too. I had never played D&D before, but I loved RPG video games, so I was really excited by the opportunity to not only play D&D, but play it with Sarah. I agreed, and Tom said he'd pick me up on the night. I also gave him my number, although I didn't think about it at the time. It was strange that he asked for my number since Sarah was supposed to be there too, and she'd be able to contact me instead. Tom came to pick me up, and when I got into his car, I saw Sarah wasn't there. I asked him why, and he just said that she was busy that night, but might join us another time. I was disappointed, but still wanted to go, so I got in his car anyway. When we arrived, I was introduced to the group, which consisted of about 3 other players and the DM. They were just starting a new campaign, and we were all making new characters. Being the newbie that I was, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing at all. Thankfully, the group were super nice and welcoming, and the DM helped me in making my very first character. I'd describe it, but to be honest, it's not really relevant to the story. The only thing of note that happened was Tom being weirdly white knighty towards my character, like taking a big chunk of damage by flinging his body between my character and a monster, or insisting that I take most of his loot. I just thought he was being nice because it was my first time, and he wanted me to enjoy myself, so I wrote it off. Well, so far, things seem innocent enough, though Opie's friend not being there was a bit of a red flag. The session concluded after a couple of hours, and I could not wait for the next one. Tom took me home and asked me if I'd like to see him before the next session so I could make some more characters, learn more about the game, etc. He promised that Sarah would be there next time, so I agreed. The day to meet Tom and Sarah comes around, and Sarah once again is not there. Tom, once again, says that Sarah was busy, but that we could still hang out, so I agreed and got into his car. This is where things start to get really weird. He first took me to a cafe and brought out some character sheets for me to work on. I was excited and immediately started trying to make one before realizing that I still didn't know what I was doing. Tom had brought a couple of his books out for me to look at, but nothing made sense to me. I thought about asking him for help, but something about the vibe was off. Tom was being weirdly quiet. You know that feeling you get when you can feel someone staring at you, even when you're not looking at them? Yeah, I felt that. It freaked me out so much that I couldn't concentrate on the character sheet at all, but I didn't want to look up from it either. Eventually, our drinks came, and I had to abandon the still blank character sheet. Tom started talking to me about all kinds of stuff that wasn't to do with D&D at all. Things like how he saw me as his friend, and how he had seen me that way since I was 13. Okay, things are starting to get a bit more creepy now. How it was nice to spend this alone time together, and how pretty I looked when thinking about something. Yep, massively more creepy. Basically, he was being a creep. I got super uncomfortable and just really wanted to go home, but as I said earlier, I had a lot of anxiety issues. Telling him that I'd changed my mind and wanted to go home was not something I could do, so I just tried to put on a smile and get through the day. Tom did even more weird stuff, like trying to hold my hand or cuddle me in public. The creep meter overfloweth. I'd always lean away from him and try to make it clear that I didn't want to be touched without actually saying it. At one point, we passed by a shop that sold D&D books, and as we passed, he said to me, "The books are really expensive. I could lend you the money for some, but you would owe me something for it." Ew. Just ew. I immediately got a bad vibe and said, "No, I'm good, thanks." He took me to get lunch at a pizzeria and paid for all my food. At one point, he offered to get me an alcoholic drink, even though I wasn't old enough to drink. He also asked me what my favorite alcoholic drink was, and then recommended a drink to me. He said, "You have to be careful with it though. It's so good that you don't realize you've drunk too much until it's too late. Then anything can happen to you." Holy crap, and this was OP's friend's dad. This is just disturbing. Once again, I got a really bad vibe. Literally, the sentence after that was him inviting me to a Comic-Con on the other side of the world, offering to share a hotel room with him, and making a comment about ordering wine for room service. I said something about not having a passport and being scared of heights, both true, and said no. He kept pushing, offering to help me get my passport, but I just mentioned my fear of heights again. Not once since the cafe had we talked about D&D at all. When it finally came time for Tom to take me home, he tried to pressure me to spend more time out with him, but I made up some excuse that my dad wanted me home in time for dinner. I still remember, clear as day, what Tom said to me during the car ride home. "I don't want to take you home right now, but I'm going to anyway because it's the right thing to do." You know that feeling when your blood runs cold? Yeah, I felt that. I suddenly became very aware that it was just us in the car, that he was the driver, and that really, he could take me anywhere he wanted, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Thankfully, he did take me home and tried to set up another meeting where we'd go to the movies. Jeez, this creep just won't take a hint. I gave him some wishy-washy, "I'll think about it" response, and headed straight inside. I told my dad about the whole thing, who was angry of course. Now get this, when I next saw Sarah in college, as we were in the same class, I told her all about that weird day and had mentioned at some point about how she was supposed to be there. She absolutely flipped out, saying that Tom had never once mentioned anything about D&D, taking me to a session, or seeing me that weird day to her. Well, imagine that. She knew nothing about any of it, despite Tom promising me that he would get her involved, and said that she would have loved to come with me. She was also angry at how her father had treated me that day, and how much of a creepy a-hole he'd been to me. She decided to call and confront him right there and then, tearing into him and demanding to know why he'd creeped on her best friend behind her back. After the phone call, she told me that he had turned everything on me and had said that I'd not only exaggerated things, but that it was my fault for not saying no. Thankfully, Sarah is an awesome friend, so she didn't believe anything Tom said about me. We're still really close friends now, and I haven't spoken to Tom since that day. It was really sad that this was my first experience of Dungeons & Dragons, and unfortunately, I've never been able to play again. Not because I've been put off or anything, I just haven't found anyone else with the same interests as me. Thanks for reading my story. I know it's not your typical horror story, since nothing bad actually happened in the game. It was more someone using D&D as a way to creep on me out of game. But at least nothing more happened. TLDR, Guy promises to take me and his daughter, my best friend, to our first D&D session. Best friend wasn't there, and her dad said she was busy. Her dad then offers to take me out to help me learn more about D&D, and promises to bring my best friend. Best friend, again, wasn't there, and her dad proceeds to creep on me the entire day. I tell best friend, and she confronts her dad about it, and I never heard from her dad again. Sheesh, what a frickin' creep. And not much of a smart one either. He had to have known that OP and her best friend would eventually talk to one another, and that OP would tell her what her dad did. It's made even more creepy when Tom said that he considered OP a, quote, friend since she was 13. Then there was the whole deal with him taking her home and saying that he could just take her anywhere. Then to have the gall to tell his daughter that it was OP's fault since she didn't say no, when he was the one that said Sarah was going to be there both times, knew that OP was gay, and also knew that OP had anxiety issues, which he basically used to his advantage. I'm sure that this whole thing put a strain on Sarah's relationship with her dad, but at least OP has never heard from him after this. Though it is a shame that this is OP's only memory of D&D, and hopefully she can find some like-minded people to play some D&D with so that she can actually have a good experience with it. Some people, man. I think y'all deserve a kitty after that story. There we go. Now I think we can move on to the next story. One of my players disrespected the table so hard that I'm considering kicking him. By Reddit user Rail1HP. We are in the middle of the party's Warlock's character arc. Literally, next session, we'll be fighting his patron, a Kraken. So currently, he is the only player who is absolutely necessary and who the game cannot run without. So the day comes. I sent out a poll in our Discord asking who will be there, who will be late, and who will be missing, etc. He answers first, mere seconds after the poll posted, and he marked that he'll be there on time. Everyone gathers. A couple of us, myself included, are in bad mental health spots, and playing the game could really perk us up for the rest of the week. Two of my players are parents, and they left their child's birthday party early in order to be there on time. The grandparents took over, and the kid is only 2. She didn't even notice. The Kraken sheet has been tweaked. The map is ready. I found a metal version of the Kraken theme from Pirates of the Caribbean. We had snacks, we had dice, and we were ready. Except our Warlock is nowhere to be found. He was texted multiple times by multiple people. He was called. No answer. After we sat and waited for him for almost an hour and a half, I regretfully released my friends to go back to their evenings. Almost 2 hours after the game was meant to begin, he texted the group saying, "Hey, sorry, I left my house without my phone." That was it. No further apologies. No acknowledgement of the fact that the session was cancelled because of him. After making sure some cooler heads than mine reviewed my text before I sent it, I told him that I felt extremely disrespected by such a dismissive display towards everyone's time, effort, and sacrifice, especially during his own arc, and that this won't be tolerated a second time. And he just texted me back after almost a full day that he, quote, didn't think an apology would help. I'm effing livid, Reddit. If he doesn't show next session, I'm about to railroad his warlock getting pulled under and move on with the story for the sake of my players who actually care about it. I've never felt so slapped in the face. F all my prep to give him a fun story, I guess. Edit. I sent him another message several hours ago telling him that I must insist on a real apology to the group at large before the next session, and he immediately went offline and has proceeded to ghost me. If he doesn't get his crap together and man up before next session, he has 5 whole days to do it, then his warlock is Kraken food. Edit 2. Additional info. This situation is not the norm. I do run character arcs, but they're closely tied into the story, and at no point are the other players not able to do things, even on someone else's arc. I don't normally cancel a session if one person doesn't show up. This game has been running for over 2 years, and there's been maybe 3 sessions total that absolutely required one character in particular. In every other situation, and any other session, running them as an NPC would be totally valid, and we would likely treat them as not being there at all, and then taking a volunteer to run them in combat if applicable. I totally respect everyone saying to just run without him, and I'd agree with you on any other session. But if you were about to fight an entity that hounded explicitly you for the entire campaign, and then that session ran without you, wouldn't you be upset? I know I would be, so I wasn't willing to do that. Yeah, I would say that is pretty egregious, and OP, as well as the other players, have every right to be upset with Warlock. I understand that sometimes crap can come up out of the blue, and that D&D has to take a back seat, and perhaps Warlock wasn't lying when he said that he forgot his phone, but at least have the courtesy of apologizing for wasting everyone else's time. I also understand OP's stance on not running the game without him. I mean, my group has had sessions where a player couldn't play, so someone else would just run their character. But there have been times where we had to cancel the session due to us being at a pivotal moment in the story. Hopefully, Warlock will mature a bit and just apologize for being such a douche canoe, and the campaign can move forward with his arc. But if not, at least it sounds like OP isn't having any of it, and will just continue the game for the other players, but without Warlock. But with that said, before we move on to today's final story, if you're enjoying the video, I humbly ask that you click that like button, as it really does help out the channel. And to help entice you further, here is another kitty. Kitties are freaking awesome. But with that said, let's move on to the next post. DM bullied me in-game because I didn't want to date his friend. By Reddit user Phytos V Miles. So this was back in my late teens. I was invited to join my first D&D group online via a guy, male 22 at that time, we'll call him AJ, who I later found out had feelings for me, a female of the age of 18. At first, it was great. We did a one-shot that lasted a couple hours, and I had a really incredible time. And after that trial run, we all decided to play together, officially. We had a DM, his girlfriend, 2 of my mutual friends, and the guy who invited me, and 2 of his other friends. 7 in total, before we had a person drop out a few sessions in. As it was my first official campaign, all done over Discord and Roll20, I was still super new and had all the quirks of trying to get my footing, both as a player and a character. I'm not sure what the DM's initial idea for the world was. Serious, fun and goofy, etc. So I followed everyone else's lead. I played a bard elf who had a laid-back personality, but knew when to be serious. Very baby's first campaign stuff. Fast forward about a year in, I started to run into a problem. The guy who invited me was actually a super close friend to the DM, who played a lawful type paladin and had grown feelings for me. I wasn't interested, for several reasons, and by this point in the campaign, he and I were on rocky shores because he went from being a friend to actively trying to pursue me, despite several declines, both in and out of game. It got to the point that our DM stepped in after a session to, quote, mediate the situation, in which I got punished in-game for declining to be romantic with AJ's paladin, as well as almost an hour-long argument with the two of them about how my refusal to give AJ a chance and our characters arguing was ruining the game for everyone else. This attitude became the norm. AJ would say something to me in front of the group, I would respond, and the DM would immediately take his side. Rinse and repeat. The final nail in the coffin came towards the end of the year. After a particularly hard battle, our team ended up with a boatload of cash and not much left to do. Some characters got new weapon upgrades, and others went out to get absolutely drunk and celebrate, mine included. My character happened to stumble out from the inn that they were staying at, and drunkenly gave her coins away to knights and a local beggar. This prompted the DM to snap and call me chaotic stupid, breaking from his usual role to belittle me for almost 5 minutes about how stupid of a party member my character was, how she didn't fit into the story or the team, and how they, quote, didn't know how she survived as long as she did, being this stupid. He even tried to get the other players to agree before digging on me even more, no longer referring to my character's name, and instead saying, "You're chaotic stupid." It was really hurtful to the point that I didn't talk for the rest of the session. I was burned, thinking this group of people that I've known for almost a year would at least tell him to stop or lay off. But they didn't. I think I cried afterwards. To say the least, it was embarrassing and really uncomfortable. The group promptly disbanded after this, and no one returned to play, at least in this group. I didn't find out until recently that they revamped a new session, brought in one of my close friends from the group, and also apparently used a group pet that I helped capture from one of our previous sessions here, too. In hindsight, there were so many red flags I didn't see then that I know only now, looking back. I think I was still learning. The DM had a very specific vibe and story in mind that no one was really following, and because I was not interested in AJ, the DM started to target me as a result of trying to have his back. I've done several groups after this, and I even got a chance to DM as well too. I've definitely grown as a player from that first session, but looking back, I can't even comprehend why I stayed there in the first place. Yeah, it definitely does sound like the DM was targeting OP here for not dating his friend. It's almost like AJ invited OP to the D&D campaign and conspired with the Dungeon Master to use the game as a way to get OP to get with AJ, and when OP still refused, retaliated in-game due to her refusal. Now, was drunkenly giving away all your money to random NPCs in-game kinda stupid? Yeah, but it was the way that OP was role-playing her character. To go on that tirade on OP like the DM did was completely uncalled for, and it's probably good that the game fell apart after that. It is good to hear that this did not turn OP away from D&D, and that OP has gotten a few D&D games under her belt, and has even DM'd a few. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I really do appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.